Ethan never liked being home alone at night, especially out there, where the nearest neighbor was a good half-mile away. His mom worked late shifts at the diner in town, and their little house sat right on the edge of a long, empty road, completely surrounded by cornfields. On calm nights, the wind barely even rustled the stalks. But that meant every single sound carried, and on this particular night, the crickets had gone strangely, unnervingly silent. He was just sitting in the living room, trying to distract himself with a game on his phone, when the porch light flickered. It was motion activated, so it only ever came on when something passed by. He looked up, half expecting to see a stray cat or maybe a raccoon digging through the trash. But when he glanced at the window, there was no movement through the curtain, just stillness. A few minutes passed, and it flickered again. This time, Ethan muted the TV and just listened. In the sudden silence, the floorboards under his feet seemed to groan and protest every tiny shift of his weight. He slowly, cautiously, approached the window, careful not to let his shadow show against the curtain. When he peeked through the tiny gap between the fabric and the frame, his stomach plummeted. A man was standing under the porch light. He wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, with his head tilted up slightly, as if he was trying to see right through the window, right at him. His clothes were dark, and his face was partly shadowed by the angle of the light, but Ethan could tell he was smiling. It wasn't the kind of friendly smile you'd give a stranger on the street. No, this was the kind of smile that says, "I know you're in there. I know you're watching." Ethan jerked back from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. He thought about calling his mom, but he knew she was working a double shift. He didn't want to worry her, to make her rush home for what might be nothing. Instead, he grabbed the old landline from the kitchen wall and quickly dialed their neighbor. "Mr. Hall," he explained as fast as he could that someone was outside, that a strange man was just standing on their porch. Mr. Hall, without a moment's hesitation, said he'd drive over right away. Ethan kept all the lights off and waited, his body tense. The porch light went dark again. For a brief, hopeful moment, he thought maybe the man had left. Then, it blinked back on. He was closer now. So much closer. Ethan could see him more clearly through the curtain. His face looked wrong, somehow, stretched and pale, like a mask pulled too tight, like he hadn't slept in weeks. And in his hand, he was holding something long and dark, maybe a crowbar, maybe just a thick stick. The light flickered again and went out, plunging the front yard back into absolute darkness. When Ethan dared to look back, the figure was gone. A wave of relief, cold and weak, washed over him, but it didn't last. He ran to the kitchen and threw the deadbolt on the back door, his hands shaking. Then he rushed around, checking the locks on all the windows. That's when he heard a new sound. Slow, deliberate steps on the gravel of the driveway. Scrape, scrape, then a long, dragging sound along the side of the house. "Go away," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. There was no response, just more silence. And then, from the living room, came the one sound he was dreading most. The faint, metallic creak of the front door handle turning. Ethan froze. He remembered his mom saying she'd replaced the lock, but sometimes it stuck. It didn't catch properly. He ran to the hallway closet, his mind racing, and grabbed the old aluminum baseball bat he used for school games. He scrambled behind the couch, pressing himself into the corner, making himself as small as possible. The front door creaked open. Heavy boots stepped onto the wooden floor inside. He could hear slow, raspy breathing. The floorboards groaned under the intruder's weight as he moved further into the house. Ethan gripped the bat tighter, his palms slick with sweat. The man's footsteps stopped right near the couch where he was hiding. For a long, terrifying moment, there was nothing but the sound of their two heartbeats in the silent room. Then, suddenly, headlights flooded through the front windows, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. A car had pulled into the driveway. "Ethan," it was Mr. Hall's voice, booming and clear. The intruder darted out the back door in an instant, a blur of motion in the dark. Ethan scrambled out from behind the couch and ran to the porch, shaking uncontrollably. Mr. Hall rushed inside, his face a mask of concern, and began checking the rooms. The back door stood wide open, swinging gently in the night air. They called the police, who searched the property for what felt like hours, but found nothing. Nothing, except for a line of deep, muddy footprints leading from the back porch all the way to the edge of the cornfield, and a single, torn piece of dark cloth snagged on the barbed wire fence. Ethan's mom quit her job at the diner 2 weeks later. They moved into town before the month was over, to a small apartment with neighbors on all sides. But even now, sometimes late at night, when he's alone, Ethan swears he can still see that porch light flicker in the corner of his eye, a sudden, bright flash in the darkness, even when he knows for a fact there's no porch anymore. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Stay safe out there. When Nora bought the old house on the edge of town, she thought it would be a fresh start. After her divorce, she needed somewhere quiet for herself and her little brother Liam. The house sat near a patch of woods, the kind that grew too thick for comfort, but the price was low and the yard was big enough for Liam to play in. It seemed perfect. For the first few weeks, life felt normal again. Liam started at the local middle school, and Nora spent her evenings painting and trying to make the house feel like home. The neighbors were polite but distant, and no one ever came by after dark. She noticed how quickly the streets emptied at night. As if everyone preferred to be indoors before sunset, it started one Friday. Nora was up late working on her laptop in the living room. Liam had gone to bed hours earlier. Around midnight, she heard it, a single knock beneath the window, not on the glass, but below it, like someone tapping the wooden siding of the house. She froze, listening. Nothing. She told herself it was just a branch, or maybe a raccoon. But then it came again, 3 slow knocks. Then, silence. She peeked through the curtain. The yard was empty. The porch light illuminated only the fog that had settled along the tree line. She turned the light off and went back to her room, trying to shake the unease. The next morning, she checked under the window. There were no branches, no marks, nothing. But when Liam came down for breakfast, he asked her why she'd been talking to someone outside last night. Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I woke up and heard you whispering near my window," he said. "I thought maybe you were on the phone or something." "I wasn't outside, Liam," she said softly. "Go get ready for school." That night, it happened again. The knocking came just after midnight, steady this time, rhythmic, almost impatient. Nora crept to the window and pressed her ear to the wall. She could hear breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. She called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later, but found nothing. The officer told her it was probably kids from the neighborhood playing pranks. But Nora noticed the way he avoided looking toward the woods. He gave her a number to call if it happened again and drove off quickly. Over the next week, the knocking continued, sometimes under the living room window, sometimes beneath Liam's. Always late at night. She started sleeping with the lights on and the phone beside her bed. Liam was scared to be alone, even during the day. On Thursday, Nora had enough. She set up her old phone by the window with the camera facing outside, recording through the night. The next morning, she found the video stopped at 2:17 a.m. The screen went black right after a faint tapping sound. When she replayed the final frame, her heart dropped. In the grainy light, just before the feed cut out, a hand appeared in the bottom corner of the frame. It was thin and gray, the fingers too long, pressing flat against the glass. That night, Nora decided they would leave. She packed a few bags and told Liam they'd stay with her friend across town. As they loaded the car, she realized she'd forgotten her wallet in the kitchen. She ran back inside. That was when she heard it. Knock, knock, knock. This time it came from the back of the house. She froze by the doorway, clutching her phone. The knocking moved from one window to the next, faster, circling the house. Liam called her name from the car, his voice shaking. The knocking stopped. Then, from his bedroom window, came a faint voice. It was Liam's voice, whispering, "Let me in." Her blood ran cold. She looked toward the car. Liam was still sitting inside, staring at her through the windshield. The whisper came again, this time closer, just below the window near her. "Let me in." Nora ran. She didn't lock the door. She didn't look back. They drove all night until they reached her friend's place 2 towns over. The next morning, Nora called the police again. They searched the house and found the back door wide open. Under Liam's bedroom window, the dirt was disturbed, marked by deep impressions that looked like knees and hands pressed into the soil. They also found something else, a smudge on the outside of the window pane, faint but visible when the sunlight hit it just right. It was a handprint, but it was upside down, the fingers pointing toward the ground. Nora never returned to that house. She sold it within a month, though no one stayed there long. Neighbors say lights still flicker in the windows at night, and sometimes, if the wind dies down, you can hear the soft sound of knocking, always 3 times, always beneath the window. Lisa and Daniel had been together for 3 years, and this was supposed to be their quiet escape from everything. A long weekend away from the city at a small rental cabin, hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The first 2 days had been perfect. They hiked, cooked over the fire pit, and spent the nights watching movies with the windows open to the cool air. On the 3rd night, the fog rolled in. It came without warning, thick and gray, swallowing the forest until the trees looked like faint shadows in the mist. Daniel joked that it felt like a horror movie, but Lisa didn't laugh. There was something about the silence that came with the fog that made her uneasy. No birds, no crickets, not even the hum of insects. It was as if the world outside had stopped existing. They stayed inside, playing cards by the fire. Around midnight, Daniel stepped out onto the porch to grab firewood. Lisa heard him mutter something. Then his footsteps stopped. "What is it?" she called. "Nothing," he said after a pause. "I just thought I saw someone by the tree line." Lisa felt her chest tighten. "Someone out here. Probably just a hiker or a hunter," he said, forcing a laugh. But his voice sounded wrong. He came back in, bolting the door behind him. They tried to shrug it off. But an hour later, while they were cleaning up the kitchen, something knocked softly on the wall. 3 slow taps that came from the side of the house. Daniel looked toward the window, but there was nothing but thick fog pressing against the glass. "Probably an animal," he said, but his tone was thin. The tapping came again. This time it was closer, near the back door. Lisa's heart started to race. She whispered, "What if it's that person you saw?" Daniel grabbed the flashlight and shined it through the window by the sink. The beam didn't reach far. It just bounced off the wall of fog. For a second, though, Lisa thought she saw a figure standing there, tall, still, and facing the cabin. Then it was gone. They decided to stay up. Daniel loaded the fire poker in his hand like a weapon. Lisa sat near the fireplace, trying to focus on the flames. But then came another sound, a dragging noise on the porch, slow and deliberate, like someone was scraping a heavy bag across the boards. Lisa whispered, "Daniel, call the ranger." He tried, but there was no service. The fog had killed the signal completely. The dragging stopped. A moment later, the doorknob turned. It rattled once, then again, harder. Daniel shouted, "Get away from the door." Whoever it was didn't answer. The doorknob stilled. Lisa's breath trembled as she pressed her hand to her mouth. Then, through the fogged glass of the front window, a face appeared, pale, with empty eyes, staring in. The face lingered for a few seconds before vanishing into the mist. They didn't sleep that night. By morning, the fog had started to thin. When Daniel stepped outside, he froze. Footprints covered the ground around the cabin, dozens of them, circling over and over, as if someone had been pacing around all night. They were barefoot. Daniel took photos, but by the time the ranger arrived that afternoon, the prints were almost gone. The ranger told them a story about a man who'd gone missing near the ridge 2 years ago. He'd been a local hunter who vanished in a snowstorm. Some hikers claimed to see him wandering in the fog sometimes, always watching cabins from the trees. Lisa wanted to leave immediately, but Daniel convinced her to stay one more night. That was their mistake. The fog returned, heavier than before. Around 2 in the morning, Lisa woke to the sound of whispering. She sat up, certain it was outside the window. It sounded like Daniel's voice, except Daniel was asleep beside her. The whispering grew clearer. Someone was saying her name, over and over, in a low rasp. Lisa shook Daniel awake, but before he could react, something slammed against the window so hard that the glass cracked. They both screamed. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. Outside the broken pane stood a man, gaunt, gray-skinned, his mouth twisted into a strange, lifeless grin. His eyes reflected the beam like an animal's. They bolted out the back door, running through the fog toward the car. The headlights barely cut through the white air. As Daniel started the engine, Lisa looked back toward the cabin, caught in the rearview mirror. She saw the man standing in the driveway, perfectly still, his face half hidden in the fog. They drove down the mountain without looking back. When the ranger checked the cabin the next morning, he found the door open and the fog still clinging thick around the trees. On the cracked window was a single handprint, smeared with something dark, almost like ash. Lisa and Daniel never spoke of it again. But every year, when the fog season comes, Lisa says she sometimes hears her name whispered outside her apartment window, in the same rasping voice from that mountain night.